Imagine a cellar. Not just a cellar, but the gut of an ancient whale, beached on the shores of the apocalypse. The air here is a thick, viscous mixture of stone dust, the smell of damp earth, sweat, and a faint, sweetish aroma of decay that is forever seeped into their skin, their lungs, their very souls. August 20th, 1945. 14 days have passed since the sun fell to earth. In this cellar, beneath the ruins of a sake brewery in Hiroshima, a war is being fought. A quiet, almost silent war for the right to take one more breath. In the farthest corner behind a barricade of empty barrels and broken furniture sits Kenji. He is 13 years old, but his eyes are those of an old man who has witnessed the birth and death of universes. His face is a mask of soot and dried mud, from beneath which peers an unnatural, almost porcelain paleness. On his lap, a little girl named Yuki sleeps, curled into a ball. She is 5, maybe 6. No one knows for sure. She hasn't spoken since that day, only sometimes flinching in her sleep with a quiet sob. Kenji strokes her matted hair, very carefully, so as not to wake her. He is their guardian, their father, their merciless law. He is the Oyabun of this small, dying clan of 7 children. Outside, near the blocked entrance, there is a rustle. Everyone freezes. Akira, a thin, bespectacled boy of about 12, his genius and right-hand man, slowly picks up a sharpened piece of rebar from the floor. His hands are trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion. They haven't eaten in 2 days. Their last source of water, condensation seeping down the walls, has almost run dry, and those outside know it. The others, Ryuji's gang, who came 3 days ago. They are bigger, stronger, and there are more of them. And they want what's inside. They want their shelter. Kenji raises his eyes. In the dim light of a makeshift lamp Akira fashioned from a tin can and a rag soaked in machine oil, he sees his people, his family. They are looking at him. There's no hope in their eyes, only the expectation of a command. They are his responsibility. He remembered his father's words, spoken long ago in another, almost unreal life. Family isn't who you share blood with, Kenji. Family is who you are willing to die for, and more importantly, who you are willing to kill for. He hadn't understood the depth of those words then. Now he understood them with every cell of his tormented body. The rustle outside comes again, closer this time. They're trying to clear the rubble. Hunger has made them bold. Kenji slowly, silently lays Yuki's head on an old bag of rice straw, rises and picks up his club, the leg of a broken table into which he'd hammered several rusty nails. A cold, ruthless determination floods him, pushing out the hunger, the fear, the despair. He will not give them his home. He will not give them his family. He raised the club, signaling the others. At that moment, he didn't yet know that the most terrible battle awaited him not here, in the dark cellar, but up above, in the world that would come to save them. But to understand how a 13-year-old boy became the chief of a feral tribe, how children who were playing with balls in the streets just yesterday became warriors defending their fortress on the ruins of the world, we must go back 15 days. To the day their world still existed. To the last morning of Hiroshima. August 5th, 1945. The next day was not yet cursed. It was just a day filled with the drone of cicadas, the smell of the sea and dusty roads. Hiroshima lived its strange, feverish wartime life. The city did not yet know that its name would be written in history, not with black characters, but burned in by a blinding flash. For 13-year-old Kenji, it was an ordinary day. He sat on a mat in a small room of their house, located in a quarter where the smells of soy sauce from the shops mixed with the delicate scent of sakura and the sharp odor of tobacco. His father, Tanaka-san, a man with eyes that seemed to see right through you and hands covered in intricate tattoos hidden beneath a silk shirt, was teaching him to play Go. This was not just a game. Every stone placed on the board was a lesson. "Don't look at one stone, Kenji," his father said, his voice calm and deep like the beat of a distant drum. "Look at the whole board. Don't think about how to capture territory now. Think about what paths you are cutting off for the enemy 5 moves ahead. Strength is not in the attack. Strength is in control." His father was not just a man. He was the oyabun of a small but respected yakuza group. They didn't trade in weapons or engage in dirty business. Their strength was information, their commodity was order. They held the district, settled disputes, protected small merchants from larger gangs. They were the shadow of the law in a world where the official law was increasingly looking toward the front lines. Kenji admired his father. His calmness, his ability to see people's weaknesses, his justice, which sometimes seemed harsh, but was always understandable. In the evening, they would walk the streets. His father would greet the merchants, and they would bow low to him with genuine respect. He always told Kenji, "Respect, son, cannot be taken by force. It can only be earned. And more often than not, it is bought not with money, but with the word you keep and the protection you give." That day, Kenji met Akira. He was sitting on a crate near a ruined wall, trying to fix an old radio using pieces of wire and some strange device. Other boys were laughing at him, pushing him. Akira was an outsider. His family had recently moved to Hiroshima to escape the bombings in Tokyo. He was clumsy, with huge glasses that constantly slipped down his nose. Kenji walked up and stood silently next to Akira. The bullies, seeing Tanaka-san's son, immediately vanished. Akira, without looking up, muttered, "Thanks." "What are you doing?" Kenji asked. "Trying to catch a voice," Akira replied. "They say at night you can hear signals from across the sea. Not ours, foreign ones." He was obsessed with technology, mechanics, everything Kenji considered boring. But there was something captivating in his persistence. That same evening, Kenji saw little Yuki. She was sitting on the threshold of her shack with her mother, who was weaving paper flowers into her hair. Yuki was laughing, and her laughter was like the chime of tiny bells. The world was still whole, fragile, stretched taut like a string, but whole. At night, Kenji woke to his parents' quiet conversation. His mother was crying. "They'll send us all to our deaths, Tanaka," she whispered. "They are taking the last of the men. Soon, they will come for you." His father was silent for a long time. Then Kenji heard his calm voice. "As long as I am here, nothing will happen to our family. I built this world for you, and I will protect it." That was the last night Kenji believed the world could be protected. A sense of foreboding already hung in the air. Unsettling rumors, infrequent air raid sirens that turned out to be false alarms, leaflets dropped by American planes that no one read, dismissing them as propaganda. The city held its breath, like an animal before a predator's pounce, not knowing from where the blow would come. In the morning, his father looked at Kenji for a long time as he left for school. He placed a hand on his shoulder, a heavy, steady hand. "Whatever happens, Kenji," he said, and for the first time unfamiliar notes sounded in his voice. "Remember who you are. You are my son. You have no right to be weak." He did not yet know that these words would become his testament, his curse, and his only weapon in the hell that awaited them all in just a few hours. August 6th, 1945, 8:14 in the morning. The sky was impeccably clear, almost white from the heat. The air shimmered and melted. The cicadas wailed their endless song. Kenji was in the schoolyard. Like many school children in those days, they weren't studying. They were dismantling old houses to create fire breaks, a useless Sisyphean task meant to save the paper city from incendiary bombs. He was dragging a heavy wooden beam when something in the sky changed. It wasn't a sound, not a movement. It was a feeling, as if someone enormous and unseen had raised a hand over the city. He looked up. High, high in the blinding blue, he saw 3 silver dots. Just 3. Not the armada of bombers they had been prepared for. Just 3 distant sparks. The siren didn't wail. No one screamed. It was unnaturally calm. And then came the pika, the flash. The sky split apart. It wasn't light in the usual sense. It was the very essence of light. Its primordial, unbearable fury unleashed. The world vanished, dissolved in a sea of magnesium fire. In that fraction of a second, Kenji saw what the human eye should not see. He saw the skeletons of his comrades through their still living bodies like an X-ray. He saw the shadows of people permanently etched into stone walls. All sound disappeared, as if the world had been plunged into the depths of the ocean. There was only absolute, all-consuming silence. And the light. White. Hot. Final. He was saved by chance. The very beam he was dragging slipped from his hands and knocked him to the ground a moment before the flash. He fell behind the low concrete border of a school flower bed. That centimeter of concrete became the line between life and instant vaporization. And then the dawn arrived. The sound returned. But it was not the sound of an explosion. It was the roar of a collapsing universe. The shockwave, moving faster than sound, struck with the force of 100 hurricanes. It lifted people, cars, rooftops, and threw them like children's toys. Kenji pressed himself to the ground, feeling the air turn into a solid wall that tried to crush him, to drive him into the very bedrock of the planet. All around him was a symphony of total destruction, grinding, cracking, roaring. The school building folded like a house of cards. Trees ignited and turned into torches. When he dared to open his eyes, the world he knew was gone. In its place was something indescribable. The sky had turned a crimson black, choked with smoke and dust. Instead of a city, smoldering ruins stretched to the horizon. Everything was burning. The asphalt, the stones, the earth itself. From this hell, figures staggered toward him. They were no longer human. Charred, with rags of skin peeling off, they walked in silence, holding their arms out in front of them so the burned remnants wouldn't touch their bodies. They didn't scream. They only moaned. It was a chorus of ghosts wandering through the ashes of their own world. Kenji jumped up and ran. He didn't know where. He ran home. An instinct stronger than fear, stronger than the pain from the burns on his back, drove him forward. He ran through streets that no longer existed, navigating by the mangled tram lines and the husks of familiar buildings. He saw terrible things. Things that would be forever burned onto his retinas. People burning alive. Horses, still harnessed to carts, turned into charred statues. He stepped over bodies that were everywhere. He reached his neighborhood. Or rather, the place where it had been. Nothing was left of their house. Only the foundation and a single stone lantern at the entrance, miraculously intact. Kenji fell to his knees and began to tear at the burning debris with his bare hands. He called for his mother. He called for his father. He screamed until his voice was a hoarse whisper, but the only answer was a silence broken by the crackle of fire and the groans of the dying. In that moment, something inside him broke and simultaneously hardened into a cold, steel shard. The boy named Kenji died there, on the ashes of his home. In his place, someone else was born. Someone who understood that the old world, with its laws, its God, and its rules, was destroyed. And if he wanted to survive, he had to become his own law. The first hours and days after the blast were like a fever dream, an endless nightmare from which there was no awakening. Time lost its meaning, becoming a viscous, cloying mass of smoke, pain, and fear. Day turned to night, but the darkness brought no relief, for the city continued to burn, and a crimson glow hung over the ruins like a never-setting hellish sun. Kenji wandered through this scorched wasteland, driven by a single desire: to find water. Thirst was a physical torture. It twisted his insides, dried his throat to a rasp, and made his tongue swell into a dry, rough husk. He saw people in their madness drinking water from fire cisterns, not knowing it was poisoned, that it was boiling with the invisible fire of radiation. He watched them die in terrible agony a few hours later. Something, some inner voice, a remnant of his father's lessons on caution, held him back. He headed for the river. The Ota River, once the heart of the city, had become a mass grave. Thousands of bodies, swollen and unrecognizable, floated in its current. People trying to escape the fire had thrown themselves into the water and died there from burns and shock. The water was warm and murky, but it was water. Kenji lay on his stomach on the remains of the embankment and drank for a long time, ignoring the bodies floating nearby. He detached himself from everything. He was now just an animal that needed to drink. On the third day, rain fell on the city. A black, sticky, oily rain. It consisted of ash, soot, and radioactive dust lifted into the atmosphere by the explosion. This rain carried death, but no one knew that then. It brought only a brief respite, settling the dust and extinguishing some of the fires. It was during this rain that Kenji found her. He had taken shelter under the twisted chassis of a truck and heard a faint cry. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but the cry came again. He crawled toward the sound and saw a little girl sitting on the ground next to the body of a woman, probably her mother. The girl was covered in soot, her dress in tatters. She wasn't wailing. She was sobbing quietly, monotonously, like a wind-up toy. It was Yuki. Kenji stopped. Something stirred inside him, a memory of himself, screaming on the ruins of his own home. He walked over and sat down beside her. He said nothing. He just took her small, cold hand in his. The girl stopped crying and looked at him with huge, empty eyes. From that moment, they were together. She didn't speak, didn't answer questions. She just followed him, holding onto the edge of his burned shirt. Her silent presence became an anchor for Kenji, keeping him from completely dissolving into the surrounding madness. Soon, they met Akira. He was sitting on the ruins of some warehouse, intently tinkering with the remains of a complex mechanism. His glasses were broken, one lens patched with a piece of electrical tape. When he saw Kenji, he wasn't surprised. In this new world, there was nothing left to be surprised about. "I'm looking for magnets," he said instead of a greeting. "From a dynamo. If I can find some copper wire, I can make a generator. And then there will be light." Kenji looked at him as if he were insane. Light. In this world where the sun itself had brought death, he was thinking about light. But there was a logic to his madness. Akira wasn't looking at the ruins. He was looking through them, seeing not wreckage, but parts. Not chaos, but a problem to be solved. He was their genius. Surviving as a trio wasn't easier, but it was more meaningful. They became the beginning, the nucleus of a future family. They wandered the dead city, haunted by hunger. Food was the main problem. Everything on the surface was burned or poisoned. They learned to search for intact cellars, to dig through the rubble of warehouses. Their first prize was a sack of scorched rice they found in the ashes of a grocery store. The taste of those half-burnt bitter grains seemed divine, but they were not alone. The city was teeming with other survivors, and many of them, driven to desperation, had already crossed the line separating man from beast. Kenji realized this when they stumbled upon a group of teenagers beating an old man, taking a can of food from him. Their eyes were filled with a vacant animal rage. Kenji grabbed Yuki and Akira and dragged them away. At that moment, he understood. Their enemy was not just radiation and hunger. Their enemy was other people. It was then that an idea began to form in his mind. An idea his father had instilled in him. They needed a system. They needed rules. They needed a home. They needed their own territory that they could defend. They needed a family. And he, Kenji, the son of the Oyabun, had to create it. The turning point, the point of no return, came on the 5th day. The hunger became unbearable. It was no longer just a dull ache in the stomach, but a constant, maddening spasm that made the body tremble and break out in a cold sweat. Yuki had grown very weak. She could no longer walk, and Kenji carried her on his back. Akira, despite his sharp mind, was completely unsuited for physical hardship. He staggered and could barely move his feet. Kenji knew that if they didn't find food in the next few hours, Yuki would simply die. That thought was sharper than any shot of glass underfoot. It was then that he remembered old Ishida's sake brewery. It was a large, sturdy building with deep stone cellars where sake was stored in huge cedar barrels. Kenji's father had respected Ishida-san and sometimes took his son with him when he visited. Kenji vaguely remembered the massive walls and heavy oak doors. He thought that if anything could have survived in this hell, it would be those cellars. It was their last hope. The journey there was long and dangerous. They made their way through areas where fires still raged, climbing over mountains of twisted metal and broken glass. When they reached the place, they were met with the same scene of destruction. Only a skeleton remained of the brewery itself. But the entrance to the cellar, blocked by debris from the roof and walls, seemed almost untouched. For several hours they cleared the rubble. Kenji worked with a frenzy, not feeling the pain in his hands which were scraped raw. Akira, using a long piece of metal as a lever, helped him move the heavy beams. Finally, they managed to clear a narrow passage. Inside was complete darkness and the smell of cool dampness mixed with a faint, sour aroma of fermentation. It was the smell of life. Kenji squeezed inside first. The cellar had survived. Huge barrels stood in a row, only a few of them damaged. In the far corner, Kenji saw something that made his heart beat faster. A small storeroom where rice for making sake was kept, and most importantly, a well with a hand pump. He rushed to the pump and began to work it with effort. A creak, then a gurgle, and water began to pour from the spout. Cold, clean, clear water. It was a miracle. A true miracle in the heart of the dead city. They drank for a long time until their teeth ached, until their stomachs hurt. Then Akira tore open one of the sacks of rice. The grain was whole. They had water. They had food. And most importantly, they had thick stone walls that could protect them. This was their home, their fortress. At that moment, as they sat on the dirt floor chewing hard, raw rice grains, others joined them. Two twin brothers, Hiroshi and Takeshi, about 10 years old, drawn by the noise. They were frightened and exhausted. Kenji looked at them, then at his companions, then at the supply of rice. His father had taught him, a family is strength, but every new mouth is a weakness if it doesn't bring value. He looked intently into the twins' eyes. "You will stay here," he said firmly, and his voice in the echoing silence of the cellar sounded unexpectedly authoritative. "But you will work, and you will obey me. These are my rules." The boys, stunned by his tone, nodded silently. In that moment, their clan was born, and its undisputed leader, its Oyabun, was Kenji. He didn't yet know what price he would have to pay for this power. He didn't know that the hardest part wasn't finding food, but managing desperate human souls. But the first law of his small empire had been established, and it was their first, most important victory over chaos. With the acquisition of a shelter, their lives changed. A chaotic animal existence was replaced by a semblance of order. The brewery cellar became their world, their universe, a Noah's Ark in the midst of a fiery flood. And in this universe, Kenji was the demiurge. He didn't think of it in such terms. He just did what he felt was necessary, guided by instinct and scraps of his father's lessons. His first decree was the law of the common pot. All the rice, all the food they found was brought to one corner and considered common property. No one had the right to eat alone. Food was divided equally, twice a day, morning and evening. The smallest but best portion was always given to Yuki. This was non-negotiable. Yuki was their symbol, a symbol of the innocence they had all lost and which they now instinctively tried to protect. The second law was a system of duties. The twin brothers, Hiroshi and Takeshi, turned out to be agile and fast. Kenji appointed them the eyes of the clan. They took turns on watch at the entrance to the cellar, observing what was happening outside and warning of danger. Kenji and Akira became the hands. They made forays in search of anything that could be useful. Akira was indispensable. His brain worked differently from the others. He saw potential in junk. From a tin can, a wick made from an old rag, and machine oil siphoned from a wrecked car, he built a smoky lamp that gave them a dim, flickering but still present light. He found several copper coils and magnets and was already making plans to build a hand-cranked generator to power a salvaged light bulb. He also figured out how to filter the rainwater they collected in an old barrel through layers of charcoal, sand, and cloth, making it relatively safe to drink. Kenji was the head. He planned the raids, determined where it was safe to go, and where it wasn't. He had an intuitive sense for danger. He learned to read the ruins as his father had read faces. He knew where a wall might collapse, where gas from smoldering fires collected, in which areas other hostile groups roamed. Over time, their clan grew. A girl named Hana joined them, who knew which plants were edible and which were poisonous. She taught them to find the edible roots of wild grasses pushing through the ash. Then came Taro, a quiet, sturdy boy who was unusually strong for his age. He became their shield, the guard and brute force for clearing rubble. Each new member was accepted according to Kenji's laws. They went through a probationary period, proving their usefulness to the family. And each accepted his authority without question. Their life settled into a routine, waking with the first rays of light that barely penetrated the shroud of smoke, the morning portion of rice, a foray, gathering anything useful, cans, salvageable clothing, tools, firewood for the fire they lit only at night so the smoke would be less noticeable, returning to the shelter, the evening meal, whispered conversations by the light of the smoky lamp, sleep. It was a harsh, primitive life, but it was a life. They had created their small island of stability in an ocean of chaos. They even reclaimed a piece of their childhood. In the evenings, Akira would use pieces of charcoal to draw pictures from their past lives on the cellar wall. Houses, trees, smiling people. Hana would softly sing old lullabies. And Kenji. Kenji sat apart and watched. He couldn't afford to relax. He was the Oyabun. He was responsible for them all. And he felt that responsibility weighing on him, turning him from a boy into an old man. He saw how his people were changing, how their eyes were becoming more serious, how their childish carelessness was vanishing. They were turning into a pack, an effective survival mechanism. But he failed to notice that the very stability he had so carefully built had given birth to a new threat. A threat not from the outside, but from within. Not everyone was willing to live by the laws of order and discipline. In a world where everything had collapsed, the idea of submission seemed unnatural. And in their family, the seed of rebellion was already beginning to sprout. Everything changed when Ryuji arrived. He appeared out of nowhere, like a ghost emerging from the ashes. He was older than the rest, about 15, tall, gaunt, with the wolfish gaze of yellow eyes. He came alone, wounded. His leg was cut by a piece of rusted metal. Hana treated his wound. Kenji, following his own rule, gave him food and water. He said his group had perished in a collapse and he was the only one left. Kenji let him stay. It was his first and most serious mistake. Ryuji was different. He wasn't afraid of Kenji. He looked at him with a poorly concealed smirk. He didn't participate in the common work, citing his injury, but his wound healed quickly. He sat in a corner and watched and talked. He spoke to the twin brothers, telling them how unfair it was that they risked their lives on watch while Kenji and Akira brought back the most valuable things. He spoke to Taro, hinting that his strength deserved more than just being a shield for weaklings. He sowed doubt like poisonous seeds. "Why does he get to decide for everyone?" he would whisper in the corners. "What makes him better than us? We are all equal in this world. The strongest survives. And we're sharing the last of the rice with girls and a Four Eyes who messes with useless junk. Kenji felt the tension. He saw the changing looks, heard the conversations die down when he approached. The atmosphere in their shelter grew heavy, suffocating. Akira was the first to tell him. He's a rot, Kenji. He's destroying everything we've built. You have to kick him out. But how? To just throw him out would be to show weakness, to show fear. Besides, Ryuji already had influence. Taro and the twins looked at him with admiration. The conflict was inevitable. It happened when Kenji and Akira returned from a particularly successful raid. They had found a collapsed American Army supply depot, where a crate of canned food had miraculously survived. 10 cans of corned beef. In their world, this was a treasure equivalent to the gold of the Incas. When they brought their prize to the cellar, they were met with grim faces. In the center stood Ryuji. "We've had a little talk," he said brazenly, "and we've decided the rules need to change. We're dividing the cans now. 1 can for each man. The girls can make do with rice." Taro and the twins stood behind him. Heina and Yuki huddled against the wall. Kenji looked at them. He could have started a fight, but he knew he would lose. Ryuji was older and stronger, and Taro was on his side. And then he remembered another of his father's lessons. If you can't win with strength, win with cunning. Make the enemy play by your rules. Kenji slowly placed the crate on the ground. "Fine," he said calmly. "You're right. Times have changed. But let's be fair. You're the oldest and strongest. You deserve more than 1 can. You deserve 2. Ryuji was momentarily taken aback by the offer. "And Taro," Kenji continued, "he's our protector. He deserves 2 as well. And you, Hiroshi, Takeshi, you are our eyes. 2 for each of you too." The twins and Taro exchanged disbelieving glances. Greed lit up in their eyes. "And what's left for the others?" Ryuji sneered. "Nothing," Kenji replied. "But the strongest survives, right? You are strong. You will eat. We, the weak, will starve. It's only fair." He spoke calmly, but his words were like stones dropped into a still pond. Ryuji, blinded by his victory, agreed. They opened the cans and ate them right there, greedily, choking on the food, while Kenji, Akira, Hana, and Yuki sat silently in the corner. And that night, what Kenji had counted on happened. The unfamiliar fatty food after a long period of starvation caused terrible stomach pains and vomiting in those who had eaten it. They writhed on the floor, weak and helpless. Kenji approached Ryuji, who was moaning and clutching his stomach. In Kenji's hands was his club with the nails. In the dim light, he looked like a shadow, a judge from the underworld. "You were right, Ryuji," he said quietly. "The strongest survives. But strength isn't just about muscles. It's also about brains. The brains to think about tomorrow. The brains to care for your people. You only thought about your own stomach. You're not strong. You're weak. And there's no place for the weak in our family." He raised the club. Taro and the twins watched him in horror. They expected a blow. But Kenji lowered the club. "Get out," he hissed. "Or next time I won't be so merciful." Ryuji, humiliated and sick, crawled out of the cellar and disappeared into the night. Taro and the twins, trembling, crawled to Kenji and bowed their heads. The rebellion had been crushed. Kenji's authority became absolute, forged not by force but by wisdom. But while they fought for power within their small world, they failed to notice a new, far more dangerous enemy appearing outside. Ryuji didn't just leave. He took with him the knowledge of their shelter, of their supplies, and he found those to whom he could sell that knowledge for a piece of bread and the right to revenge. Several days passed. Life in the cellar returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. After Ryuji's exile, Kenji's authority became not just respected, but an unchallengeable law. Taro and the twins served him with dog-like devotion, no longer daring to even think of disobedience. But tension hung in the air. Kenji felt it. He strengthened the guard, forbade solo raids, and ordered the barricade at the entrance to be reinforced. He knew Ryuji had not forgiven the humiliation, and he waited. The enemy came at dawn. Hiroshi, who was on watch, ran into the cellar, his face contorted with terror. "They're coming!" he rasped. "There are a lot of them!" Kenji rushed to the observation slit. What he saw made his heart clench. A group of about 15 children and teenagers was approaching their shelter. They were armed with sticks, pieces of rebar, stones. Their clothes were even more ragged than those of Kenji's clan, and their faces were set in expressions of hungry, desperate cruelty. Leading them was a tall, broad-shouldered boy of about 16, with a broken nose and mean, deep-set eyes. And beside him, pointing at their entrance, scurried Ryuji. He had brought a new pack, a pack of hyenas that had smelled prey. They stopped a few meters from the entrance. The leader, whom Kenji would later learn was called Oni, demon, stepped forward. "Hey, you rats!" he shouted, his voice rough and confident. "We know you have food and water. Bring it all out and get lost. And then, maybe, we'll let you live." Kenji didn't answer. He stepped away from the slit and looked at his family. 7 children against 15. They stood no chance in an open fight. "What do we do, Oyabun?" Akira whispered. There was no fear in his voice, only a question that needed a solution. Kenji's gaze swept over his home. This cellar, these barrels, this well. They weren't just things. They were their world, the only world they had left. To give it up meant plunging back into chaos, becoming homeless, hunted animals again. "We will fight," he said firmly. Laughter came from outside. "They're not answering. Guess we'll have to smoke them out." They began to dismantle the barricade. The siege had begun. The first 2 days passed in tense waiting. The enemies hesitated to launch a direct assault on the narrow passage. They tried to lure the defenders out, shouting insults, throwing rocks into the opening. But Kenji ordered them not to react. They sat in the darkness, conserving their last reserves of food and water. On the 3rd day, hunger made the besiegers more aggressive. They made their first attempt to storm the entrance. The 2 largest boys tried to crawl through the opening. They were met by Taro with his manhole cover shield and Kenji with his club. A short, brutal fight ensued in the narrow passage. The attack was repelled, but Taro's arm was wounded. It became clear they couldn't hold out like this for long. It was then that Akira, who had been feverishly building something in the corner, approached Kenji. In his hands was a strange device, a long bamboo pole with wires attached, leading to a small box, his unfinished generator. "Oyabun," he said, "I think I have an idea, but it's very dangerous." He explained his plan, a plan that was simultaneously insane and brilliant. In the cellar were several barrels of high-proof sake, alcohol, fuel. Akira proposed using it, but not to start a fire, for something else. They waited until night. The besiegers, confident in their victory, had settled down near the entrance, lighting a small fire. They were waiting for the defenders to finally weaken from hunger. On Kenji's signal, Taro and the twins, with great effort, lifted one of the barrels and began to very slowly pour its contents into the passage. The sake flowed silently down the sloping corridor to the outside, soaking the ground around the enemy's fire. They didn't notice. The smell of alcohol in the ash-filled air was undetectable. When the barrel was empty, Kenji took Akira's device in his hands. It was a primitive but effective flamethrower. The tip of the pole was wrapped in an oil-soaked rag. The generator, when the handle was turned, could produce a small spark. Kenji took a deep breath. He looked at Yuki, sleeping in the corner. He could not lose. He gave Akira the signal. Akira cranked the generator's handle with all his might. Kenji stuck the pole out of the opening and pressed a lever Akira had fashioned from a spring. A weak spark jumped at the end. In the next instant, the ground exploded. The alcohol vapors that had collected in the low-lying area ignited with a deafening roar. Blue flames engulfed the enemy camp. Heart-wrenching screams erupted. This was not a battle. It was an execution. Stunned, burned, and seized with terror, the attackers scattered, disappearing into the darkness. A minute later, it was over. Only the dying fire and a few dark, motionless shapes on the ground remained at the entrance. They had won. But the price of this victory was the last thing that remained of their childhood. Standing in the passage, breathing in the smell of burnt flesh, Kenji knew he had crossed the final line. He had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back at him. It was at that moment in the ensuing silence that they heard a new sound. Distant, but clear. The rumble of engines. And voices. Loud adult voices speaking in an unfamiliar foreign language. Salvation had arrived at the moment they ceased to be worthy of it. The first people they saw were American soldiers, tall, in strange uniforms, carrying automatic rifles. They moved cautiously, looking around the ruins with a kind of disgusted curiosity as if they had landed on another planet. Behind them came Japanese rescuers and doctors in white masks. There was no euphoria. There was shock. The children huddled in the back of the cellar, watching the newcomers with distrust and fear. These adults were from that other world, the world that had betrayed them, that had collapsed and buried their families beneath it. They no longer trusted adults. Kenji stepped forward, shielding the others with his body. He stood there, small, ragged, with his club in his hands, ready to defend his family from these huge, incomprehensible people. A soldier, seeing him, shouted something to his comrades and laughed. He didn't see a warrior, not an oyabun, but just a grimy, feral boy with a stick. It was the beginning of the end of their empire. They were surrounded. People tried to talk to them, but they remained silent. Only Yuki, seeing a man in a white coat, suddenly screamed and clung to Kenji with a death grip. Their world, their system, their laws, all of it meant nothing to the rescuers. They saw only a group of orphans who needed to be fed, washed, and sent somewhere. They were led out of the cellar one by one. Kenji tried to protest, shouting that they were a family, that they couldn't be separated. But no one listened to him. His words were the babbling of a child who didn't understand how the real world worked. They were taken to a temporary refugee camp set up on the outskirts of the city. There, they began to be processed. First came disinfection. They were stripped naked and herded under icy jets of water from a hose, washing away the dirt, the ash, and their past. Then they were dressed in identical baggy clothes. Then came the interrogation. A Japanese official, a tired man with empty eyes, spoke to them. He asked standard questions: name, age, parents' names. Kenji tried to tell him their story, about the cellar, the laws, the siege. The official listened, nodded, but in his eyes Kenji saw only indifference and disbelief. The story of a battle, of a flamethrower made from sake and a generator, sounded like the ravings of a traumatized child. They inspected the entrance to the cellar. They found traces of the fire, found the burned bodies, but the official conclusion was simple: an accident. Children playing with fire had started a blaze in which their comrades died. No one wanted to believe in a war fought by children. The adults had their own, real war, and they had no time for childish fantasies. Their feat, their brutal struggle for life, was not just forgotten. It was stolen, turned into a ridiculous, tragic accident. This was worse than any defeat. They were defeated not by an enemy gang, but by the soulless, bureaucratic system of the civilized world. The heaviest blow was the decision about their future. The family was to be disbanded. "We cannot keep you together," the official informed them without any emotion. "There are few places in the orphanages. You will be distributed to different institutions. Some of you may be sent to other cities." Kenji felt an icy coldness inside. Everything he had fought for, everything he had built, was collapsing before his eyes. He had protected his family from hunger, from enemies, from chaos. But he could not protect them from order. from adults who thought they knew better. He rushed at the official, begging him, screaming. Soldiers dragged him away. At that moment, he realized the full irony of his situation. In his cellar, he was a king, the law. Here, he was nobody. Just a number on a list of orphans. And this new world that had come to save them turned out to be a far more cruel prison than their stone cellar. The day they were separated was gray and hopeless. They were lined up on the camp's parade ground, and names were read from a list. Each name was like a hammer blow to what was left of their family. Hiroshi and Takeshi, the inseparable twins, were sent to one orphanage. They left, looking back at Kenji, tears in their eyes, but they didn't dare disobey the adults. Taro, their silent protector, being the oldest, was sent to a labor camp for teenagers. Hana, their expert on herbs, was taken to some distant monastery where nuns had set up an orphanage. Akira, their genius, their brain, was deemed especially gifted and sent to a special boarding school for children who had survived the bombing. When they said goodbye, Akira took off his broken glasses and wiped them. "We'll meet again, Oyabun," he said quietly. "I'll find a way." But there was no conviction in his voice. The worst was Yuki. As the youngest and still not speaking, she was assigned to a hospital for children with psychological trauma. When the orderlies came for her, she clung to Kenji with such force they couldn't pull her away. She screamed. For the first time in many days, she made a sound. A piercing, heart-wrenching scream filled with animal terror. Kenji held her, hugged her, whispered that everything would be all right. But his heart was breaking. He knew he was lying. They tore her from him by force. Her screams echoed in his ears for a long time. Kenji was the last one left. As the leader of the feral group, he was considered difficult and sent to the strictest orphanage, which was essentially a juvenile colony. There, a life of schedules, drills, and punishments for the slightest insubordination awaited him. He tried to rebel but quickly realized his street laws didn't work here. The system was stronger. It broke him slowly, methodically, day by day. He became withdrawn, silent. He was no longer the Oyabun. He was just Kenji again, orphan number 327. Years passed. The war ended. The city slowly rose from the ashes. Kenji grew up. He left the orphanage and tried to find the members of his family. He searched long and hard. He found Taro's grave. He had died of radiation sickness 2 years after they were separated. He heard that Hana had remained in the monastery, becoming a novice and dedicating her life to prayer. He never found the twins. Their trail was lost in the post-war chaos. He found Akira. He had indeed become a brilliant electronics engineer, working for one of the large corporations that began to rebuild Japan. They met. It was a strange meeting of two strangers. Akira was dressed in an expensive suit. He spoke of success, of the future, of technology. He barely mentioned the cellar. It seemed he had deliberately erased it from his memory. "That was a long time ago, Kenji," he said, avoiding his gaze. "We have to move on." Kenji understood that his genius had survived, but had paid for it with oblivion. He found Yuki, too, in a psychiatric hospital. She had grown up, but had never started talking. She sat by a window and stared at a single point with empty, unseeing eyes. Kenji sat down next to her. He took her hand. She didn't react. The world they had built to save her had ultimately broken her completely. Kenji himself could not find a place in the new life. He scraped by with odd jobs, often clashing with the law. He was an outsider in this world of order and prosperity. His real life had been left behind in that dark, damp cellar. He died at 35 from a radiation-related illness, quietly, unnoticed, in a cheap hospital for the poor. No one came to his funeral. The Oyabun faded into oblivion, taking the secret of his small, brutal kingdom with him. The official history of Hiroshima is a story of tragedy, suffering, and incredible rebirth. It has a place for hero rescuers, wise politicians, and hard-working builders. But in this story, there is no place for the clan of children from the Sek brewery cellar. Their feat, their cruelty, their own civilization born in the atomic fire was too inconvenient, too strange a page, one that was easier to tear out and forget. The system that saved them erased their history, like wiping an inappropriate charcoal drawing from a wall. But stories have a strange quality. They don't die completely. They turn into whispers, into rumors, into legends. Among the orphans of Hiroshima, in the overcrowded orphanages and boarding schools, tales circulated for a long time. They said there was a group of children who didn't just survive, but created their own state in the ruins. They said they were ruled by a boy who knew no fear, who was called Oyabun, and that he was the son of the great Tanaka-san himself. They told of how he had a genius who could make light from nothing, and a silent giant who protected them from all enemies. These stories were passed down from older children to younger ones, acquiring new and more fantastic details. In some versions, they defeated an entire army of looters. In others, they learned to talk to the spirits of the dead. The story became a myth of a paradise and a hell that was their home, of a cruel but just kingdom where children themselves decided what was good and what was evil. This legend became for many orphans what the cellar had been for Kenji and his family, a point of support, proof that even in total chaos, one could build one's own order, that even the smallest and weakest could fight back against a world that tries to destroy them. This story is not just a chronicle of survival. It is a reminder that civilization is a thin, fragile layer that can be shattered in an instant. And when it disappears, the most ancient, most primal instincts emerge from beneath the rubble. The fight for territory, the protection of the family, the thirst for power, and a will to live that is stronger than any fear and any pain. The achievement of Kenji's clan was not that they survived physically. Many of them died anyway. Their true victory, their tragic greatness, was that for a brief, dazzling moment in the heart of the atomic hell, they defeated chaos. They created their own world on the bones of the old one. And though this world was forgotten by official history, it lives on forever in the whispers of children born on the ashes.